and welcome to tonight's sleep story. Tonight I'd like to read you The Magical Tale of Cinderella by a vintage author. The enchanting tale of a poor girl whose fairy godmother helps make a princess. Cinderella's mother died while she was a very little child, leaving her to the care of her father and her stepsisters, who were very much older than herself, for Cinderella's father had been twice married, and her mother was his second wife. Now, Cinderella's sisters did not love her and were very unkind to her. As she grew older, they made her work as a servant and even sift the cinders, on which account they used to call her in mockery Cinderella. It was not her real name, but she became afterwards so well known by it that her proper one had been forgotten. She was a very sweet-tempered good girl, however, and everybody except her cruel sisters loved her. It happened when Cinderella was about 17 years old that the king of that country gave a ball to which all ladies of the land, and among the rest of the young girls' sisters, were invited, and they made her dress them for the ball, but never thought of allowing her to go there. Cinderella, would you not be glad to go to the ball? Her sister said. Ah, said she, you're only teasing me, for I can't go there. You are right, replied they. It would make the people laugh to see Cinderella at a ball. When they were gone, Cinderella, whose heart was very sad, sat down and cried bitterly. But as she sat sorrowful, thinking of the unkindness of her sisters, a voice called to her from the garden, and she went out to see who was there. It was her godmother, a good old fairy. Also shall go to the ball, because you are a kind, good girl. Bring me a large pumpkin. Cinderella obeyed, and the fairy, touching it with her wand, turned it into a grand coach. Then she desired Cinderella to go to the trap and bring her a rat. The girl obeyed, and a touch of the fairy's wand turned him into a very smart coachman. 2 mice were turned into footmen, 4 grasshoppers into white horses. Next, the fairy touched Cinderella's rags, and they became rich satin robes trimmed with point lace. Diamonds shone in her hair and on her neck and arms, and her kind godmother thought she had seldom seen so lovely a girl. Her old shoes became a charming pair of glass slippers, which shone like diamonds. Now, go to the ball, my love, she said, and enjoy yourself. But remember, you must leave the room before the clock strikes 11. If you do not, your dress will return to its original rags. I approve of pleasure, but not of dissipation, and I expect that you will show your gratitude by obeying me. Cinderella kissed and thanked her godmother. she stepped into her coach and drove off with her footman behind in great style. The fairy, when she was gone, returned to fairyland. Cinderella was received at the king's palace with great respect. The Lord Chamberlain bowed low to her, thinking she must be a very great lady by her dress and carriage, and he showed her at once into the ballroom. She was so beautiful that everybody looked at her and wondered who she was, and the prince asked her to dance with him, and afterwards would dance with no one else. But she made haste to leave a little before the hour fixed, and had time to undress before her sisters came home. They told her a beautiful princess had been at the ball, with whom the prince was delighted. They did not know it was Cinderella herself, and she was amused to hear them admire her grace and beauty, and say that they were sure she was a royal lady. The prince was quite vexed when supper time came, and he could not find his beautiful partner, and no one had seen her leave the room. But in hopes of beholding her again, he persuaded the king to give another grand ball. As soon as her sisters were gone to it, Cinderella's godmother arrived. "You were so good and obedient last time that I shall let you go out again," said she to the young girl. And once more the rat, mice, grasshoppers, and pumpkin, which had gone back to their original shapes after the first ball, were turned into the grand carriage and attendants, and Cinderella, whose rose-colored satin, and rubies, went to the royal ball. Directly the prince saw her, he asked her to dance, and would have no other partner. As he led her past her two unkind sisters, she saw them look at her dress with envious eyes, and knew that they wished they were as beautiful and as well dressed as she was. Again, the prince was vexed at the sudden disappearance of the beautiful stranger, and once more he persuaded the king to give a grand state ball. "I wonder if Princess Beauty will be there," said the sisters to Cinderella. "We must have new dresses, for she is so splendid. She makes everyone look shabby." Cinderella smiled as she helped them to dress. She was sure the fairy would let her go to the ball too. And she was right. Her godmother, pleased with her obedience, came in good time, and Cinderella, dressed in blue satin and pearls, went in the same style as before. The prince would scarcely let her out of his sight, and Cinderella, who was getting a little spoiled by all the flattery she heard, began to think more of herself and less of the fairy. So the time stole on, till glancing up at the clock, she saw it wanted only 5 minutes to 11. At once she darted out of the room and ran through the palace as fast as she could go, but As she reached the hall, she lost one of her precious glass slippers. She did not. Thank you, Oktayup. She did not stop to pick it up, but rushed to the door. Alas, the clock had struck 11. She found no coach, only a pumpkin, and the rat and mice ran quickly away when they saw her, while all her fine dress turned to rags. And she had to run home alone in the darkness of the night. The prince was very much surprised when he missed Cinderella again, and leaving the ball, went in search of her. He asked all the attendants, but no one had seen her, and when inquiry was made of the porter, he said that no one had gone out of the palace except a poor, ragged beggar girl. However, the prince's search was rewarded by his finding the glass slipper, which he well knew belonged to the unknown princess. He loved Cinderella so much that he now resolved to marry her, and as he felt assured that no one else could wear such a tiny shoe as hers, he sent out a herald to proclaim that whichever lady in his kingdom could put on this glass slipper should be his wife. And all the great ladies who wished to be a princess tried to put it on, but in vain. Cinderella's sisters tried, but could not get it on, and then Cinderella asked if she might try. They laughed at her, but the prince, hearing of her wish, sent for her. She went in with her sisters in her poor dress, but very clean, and at once put on the slipper. Then she drew the fellow of it from her pocket and slipped it onto her other foot. The prince, who had thought the moment he saw her that the poor girl was very much like the beautiful princess, was delighted. He insisted on Cinderella telling him her story, which she did very modestly, and all listened with wonder. As her tale ended, the fairy godmother suddenly entered the room, and placing her godchild's hand in the prince's, said, "Take this young girl for your wife, Prince. She is good and patient, and as she has known how to submit to injustice meekly, she will know how to reign justly." So, Cinderella was married to the prince in great state, and they lived together very happily. Thank you, Aishaq. She forgave her sisters and treated them always very kindly, and the prince had great cause to be glad that he had found the glass slipper. The end. Let's have a drink, shall we? I'm from Vancouver, Canada. Where are you from? I thought it was good, but a little bit surfacey. I want something with a little bit more grit, a little bit more plot. I think we have to keep reading another story. Good night, and welcome to tonight's sleep story. Have you ever heard of Sleeping Beauty? This is the classic tale of a beautiful princess and the prince who woke her with a kiss. There were formerly a king and a queen who were so sorry that they had They went to all the waters in the world, vows, pilgrimages. All ways were tried, and all to no purpose. At last, however, the queen fell with child and gave birth to a daughter. I'm like, sort of like the blue princess, like just a blue princess, like a combination of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Thumbelina, the Swan Princess, and Rapunzel. What do you think? There was a fine christening, and the princess had for her godmothers all the fairies they could find in the whole kingdom. They found 7, that every one of them might give her a gift, as was the custom of fairies in those days, and that by this means the princess might have all the perfections imaginable. We do have Swan Princess on the menu tonight. But right now we're reading Sleeping Beauty, which is about me taking a nap. Please enjoy. After the ceremonies of the christening were over, all the company returned to the king's palace, where was prepared a great feast for the fairies. There was placed before every one of them a magnificent setting with a case of massive gold, a spoon, a knife, and fork, all of pure gold, set out with diamonds and rubies. But as they were all sitting down at the table, they saw come into the hall a very old fairy whom they had not invited, because it was about 50 years since she had been out of a certain tower. But as they were all sitting down at the table, they saw come into the hall a very old fairy whom they had not invited, because it was about 50 years since she had been out of a certain tower, and she was believed to be either dead or enchanted. The king ordered her a setting, but could not furnish her with a case of gold as the others, because they had only 7 made for the 7 fairies. The old fairy fancied she was slighted and muttered some threat between her teeth. One of the young fairies who sat by her overheard how she grumbled, and judging that she might give the princess some unlucky gift, went as soon as they rose from the table and hid herself behind the hangings, that she might speak last and repair as much as possible she could the evil which the old fairy might intend. In the meanwhile, all the fairies began to give their gifts to the princess. The youngest gave her for a gift that she should be the most beautiful person in the world. The next, that she should have the wit of an angel. The third, that she should have a wonderful grace in everything she did. The fourth, that she should dance perfectly well. The fifth, that she should sing like a nightingale. And the sixth, that she should play upon all kinds of music to the utmost perfection. The old fairy's turn coming next, with a head shaking more with spite than age, she said that the princess should have her hand pierced with a spindle and die of the wound. This terrible gift made the whole company tremble, and everybody fell a-crying. At this very instant, the young fairy came out from behind the hangings and spoke these words aloud. "Be reassured, O king and queen, your daughter shall not die of this disaster. instead of dying, she shall only fall into a profound sleep, which shall last 100 years, at the expiration of which a king's son shall come and awake her. The king, to avoid the misfortune foretold by the old fairy, caused immediately proclamations to be made, whereby everybody was forbidden, on pain of death, to spin with a distaff and spindle, or to have so much as any spindle in their houses. About 15 or 16 years after. Thank you, Mr. Boomstick. The king and queen being gone to one of their houses of pleasure, the young princess happened one day to divert herself running up and down the palace. When going from one apartment to another, she came into a little room on the top of a tower, where a good old woman alone was spinning her spindle. The good woman had never heard of the king's proclamation against spindles. "What are you doing there, goody?" said the princess. "I'm spinning, my pretty child," said the old woman, who did not know who she was. "Ha," said the princess, "this is very pretty. How do you do it? Give it to me, that I may see if I can do so." She had no sooner taken the spindle into her hand than, whether being very hasty at it, somewhat unhandy, or that the decree of the fairy had so ordained it, it ran into her hand, and she fell down in a swoon. The good old woman, not knowing very well what to do in this affair, cried out for help. People came in from every quarter in great numbers. They threw water upon the princess' face, unlaced her, struck her on the palms of her hands, rubbed her temples with Hungary water, but nothing would bring her to herself. And now the king, who came up at the noise, bethought himself of the prediction of the fairies, and judging very well that it must necessarily come to pass, since the fairies had said it, caused the princess to be carried into the finest apartment in his palace, and to be laid upon a bed all embroidered with gold and silver. One would have taken her for an angel. She was so very beautiful, for her swooning away had not diminished one bit of her complexion. Her cheeks were carnation, and her lips like coral. Indeed, her eyes were shut, but she was heard to breathe softly, which satisfied those about her that she was not dead. The king commanded that they should not disturb her, but let her sleep quietly till her hour of awakening was come. The good fairy, who had saved her life by condemning her to sleep 100 years, was in the kingdom of Metakin, 12,000 leagues off, when this accident befell the princess. But she was instantly informed of it by a little dwarf who had boots of 7 leagues, that is, boots with which he could tread over 7 leagues of ground at one stride. The fairy came away immediately, and she arrived about an hour after in a fiery chariot drawn by dragons. The king handed her out of the chariot, and she approved everything that he had done, but as she had a very great foresight, she thought, when the princess should awake, she might not know what to do with herself, being all alone in this old palace. So this was what she did. She touched with her wand everything in the palace, except the king and the queen, governesses, maids of honor, guards, with their beefeaters, pages, footmen. She likewise touched all the horses which were in the stables, as well as their grooms, the great dogs in the outward court, and pretty little Mopsy too, the princess's little spaniel, which lay by her on the bed. Immediately upon her touching them, they all fell asleep, so that they would not awake before their mistress, and that they would be ready to wait upon her when she wanted them. The cooks, roasting a spit at the fire, as full as they could hold of partridges and pheasants, also fell asleep, and the fire likewise. All this was done in a moment. Fairies are not long in doing their business. And now, the king and the queen, having kissed their dear child without waking her, went out of the palace and put forth a proclamation that nobody should dare to come near it. This, however, was not necessary, for in a quarter of an hour's time there grew up all around the park such a vast number of trees, great and small, bushes and brambles, twining one within another, that neither man nor beast could pass through, so that nothing could be seen but the very top of the towers of the palace, and that too, not unless it was a good way off. Nobody doubted but the fairy, in doing this, gave a sample of her art, so that the princess, while she continued sleeping, might have nothing to fear from any curious people. When 100 years were gone and past, the son of the king, then reigning, and who was of another family from that of the sleeping princess, being gone a-hunting on that side of the country, asked, what were those towers which he saw in the middle of the great thick wood? Every one answered according as they had heard. Some said that it was a ruinous old castle, haunted by spirits. Others, that all the sorcerers and witches of the country kept their Sabbath or night meetings there. The common opinion was that an ogre lived there, and that he carried thither all the little children he could catch, that he might eat them up at his leisure without anybody's being able to follow him, as having himself only the power to pass through the wood. The prince was at a stand, not knowing what to believe, when a very aged countryman spoke to him. May it please your royal highness, it is now above 50 years since I heard my father. Thank you, Yamdar. Thank you so much for following me. The prince was at a stand, not knowing what to believe, when a very aged countryman spoke to him. May it please your royal highness, it is now above 50 years since I heard my father, who had heard my grandfather say that there was in this castle a princess, the most beautiful was ever seen, that she must sleep there 100 years, and should be awaked by a king's son, for whom she was reserved. The young prince was all on fire at these words, believing without a moment's doubt that he could put an end to this rare adventure, and pushed on by love and honor, resolved that moment to look into it. Scarce had he advanced toward the wood, when all the great trees, the bushes, and the brambles gave way of themselves to let him pass through. He walked up to the castle, which he saw at the end of a large avenue, when he went into, and what a little surprised him was that he saw none of his people could follow him, because the trees had closed again as soon as he had passed through them. However, he did not cease from continuing his way. A young and amorous prince is always valiant. He came into a spacious outward court where everything he saw might have frozen up the most fearless person with horror. There reigned over all a most frightful silence. The image of death everywhere showed itself, and there was nothing to be seen but stretched out bodies of men and animals, all seeming to be dead. He, however, very well knew, by the ruby faces and dimpled noses of the beef-eaters, that they were only asleep, and that their goblets, wherein still remained some drops of wine, showed plainly that they fell asleep in their cups. He then crossed a court paved with marble, went up the stairs, and came into the guard chamber, where the guards were standing in their ranks, with their muskets upon their shoulders, and snoring as loud as they could. After that, he went through several rooms full of gentlemen and ladies, all asleep, some standing, others sitting. At last he came into a chamber all gilded with gold, where he saw upon a bed, the curtains of which were all open, the finest sight was ever beheld, a princess, who appeared to be about 15 or 16 years of age, and whose bright and resplendent beauty was divine. He approached her with trembling and admiration, and fell down before her upon his knees. And now, as the enchantment was at an end, the princess awakened, and looking on him with eyes more tender than the first view might seem to admit of, she said, "Is it you, my prince? You have tarried long." The prince, charmed with these words, and much more with the manner in which they were spoken, knew not how to show his joy and gratitude. The prince, charmed with these words, and much more with the manner in which they were spoken, knew not how to show his joy and gratitude. He assured her that he loved her better than he did himself. His discourse was not well connected, but it pleased her all the more. It had little eloquence, but a great deal of love. He was more at a loss than she, and we need not wonder at it, for she had a long time to think on what to say to him. For it is very probable, though history mentions nothing of it, that the good fairy, during so long a sleep, had entertained her with pleasant dreams. In short, when they talked 4 hours together, they said not half what they had to say. In the meanwhile, all the palace awakened. Everyone thought upon their particular business, and as all of them were not in love, they were ready to die for hunger. The chief lady of honor, being as sharp set as other folks, grew very impatient, and told the princess aloud how hungry she was, so that supper was served up. The prince helped the princess to rise. She was entirely dressed and very magnificently, but his royal highness took care not to tell her that she was dressed like his great-grandmother, and had a point band peeping over at a high collar. She looked not a bit less beautiful and charming for all that. They went into the great hall of looking-glasses, where they supped and were served by the princess's officers. The violins and hautboys played old tunes, but very excellent, though it was now above 100 years since they had been played, and after supper, without losing any time, the Lord Almoner married them in the chapel of the castle, and the chief lady of honor drew the curtains. They had but very little sleep. The princess had no occasion, and the prince left her next morning to return into the city, where his father must have been anxious on his account. The prince told him that he lost his way in the forest as he was hunting, and that he had lain at the cottage of a collier, who gave him cheese and brown bread. The king, his father, who was of an easy disposition, believed him, but his mother could not be persuaded this was true, and seeing that he went almost every day a-hunting, and that he always had some excuse ready when he laid out 3 or 4 nights together, she no longer doubted he had some little amour, for he lived with the princess above 2 whole years, and had by her 2 children, the eldest of which was a daughter named Aurora, and the youngest, who was a son, they called Day, because he was even handsomer and more beautiful than his sister. The queen said more than once to her son, in order to bring him to speak freely to her, that a young man must take his pleasure, but he had never dared to trust her with his secret. He feared her, though he loved her, for she was of the race of the ogres, and the king would never have married her had it not been for her vast riches. It was even whispered about the court that she had ogress inclinations, and that whenever she saw little children passing by, she had all the difficulty in the world to refrain from falling upon them and eating them up. And so the prince would never tell her one word. But when the king was dead, which happened about 2 years afterwards, and he saw himself lord and master, he openly declared his marriage, and he went in great ceremony to fetch his queen from the castle. They made a magnificent entry into the capital city, she riding between her 2 children. Some time after, the king went to make war with the emperor Cantarabute, his neighbor. He left the government of the kingdom to his mother, the queen, and earnestly asked her to care for his wife and children. He was like to be at war all the summer, and as soon as he departed, the queen mother sent her daughter-in-law and her children to a country house among the woods, that she might with the more ease gratify her horrible longing to eat them. Okay, what the f is going on? This is so weird. I thought we were reading Sleeping Beauty. Like, when did like ogres and eating children happen? What? When you read like the original, like old-fashioned version, you never know what you're gonna get. Sometimes it's literally straight. Who's the one trying to eat children? I'm so confused about this story. I will have it so, replied the queen, and will eat her with a sauce, Robert. Some few days afterwards, she went there herself and said to her clerk of the kitchen, I have a mind to eat the little Aurora for my dinner tomorrow. Ah, madam, cried the clerk of the kitchen. I will have it so, replied the queen, and this she spoke in the tone of an ogress who had a will eat her with the sauce, Robert. What is the sauce, Robert? This is, it says right here. This is a French sauce made with onions, shredded and boiled tender in butter, to which is added vinegar, mustard, salt, pepper, and a little wine. Okay, well that sounds delicious, but you probably shouldn't eat children. Streaks on. Don't eat kids, even with a Robert sauce, a sauce Robert. The poor man, knowing very well that he must not play tricks with ogresses, took his great knife and went up into Aurora's chamber. She was then 4 years old and came up to him, jumping and laughing, to take him about the neck and ask him for some sugar candy, upon which he began to weep. The great knife fell out of his hand, and he went into the backyard and killed a little lamb and dressed it with such a good sauce that his mistress assured him she had never eaten anything so good in her life. He had at the same time taken up little Aurora and carried her to his wife to conceal her in the lodging he had at the end of the courtyard. Well, that's kind of stupid. You're gonna hide her at the end of the courtyard of the queen. That better be like step 1. Go to the forest. About 8 days afterward, the wicked queen said to the clerk of the kitchen, "I will sup upon little day." He answered not a word, being resolved to cheat her, as he had done before. He went to find out little day, and saw him with a little foil in his hand, with which he was fencing with a great monkey, the child being then only 3 years of age. Okay, wait. He's like knife fighting a monkey. He's literally like in a shank fight with an orangutan. I like where this is going. Let's find out what happens next. This is so messed. Okay. Okay, anyways, the knife fighting the ape. Okay, he answered not a word, being resolved to cheat her, as he had done before. He went out to find little day, and saw him with a little foil in his hand, with which he was fencing with a great monkey, the child being then only 3 years of age. He took him up in his arms, and carried him to his wife, that she might conceal him in her chamber, along with his sister, and in the room of little day cooked up a young kid, very tender, which the ogress found to be wonderfully good. Okay, and of course we know that by kid they mean a baby goat. No one's eaten any children yet, but they had very good sauce. This was hitherto all might well, but one evening this wicked queen said to her clerk of the kitchen, "I will eat the queen with the same sauce I had with her children." It was now that the poor clerk of the kitchen despaired of being able to deceive her. The young queen was turned of 20, not reckoning the 100 years she had been asleep. Her skin was somewhat tough, though very fair and white, and how to find in the yard a beast so firm was what puzzled him. He took then a resolution that he might save his own life, to cut the queen's throat, and going up into her chamber with the intent to do it at once, he put himself into as great a fury as he possibly could. I'm so scared. And came into the young queen's room with his dagger in his hand. He would not, however, surprise her, but told her with a great of respect the orders he had received from the Queen Mother. "Do it, do it," said she, stretching out her neck. "Execute your orders, and then I shall go and see my children, my poor children, whom I so much and so tenderly loved." For she thought them dead ever since they had been taken away without her knowledge. "No, no, madam," cried the poor clerk of the kitchen, all in tears. "You shall not die, and yet you shall see your children again, but it must be in my lodgings, where I have concealed them, and I shall deceive the queen once more by giving her, in your stead, a young hind." Upon this, he forthwith conducted her to his chamber, where, leaving her to embrace her children and cry along with them, he went and dressed a hind, which the queen had for her supper, and devoured it with the same appetite as if it had been the young queen. Exceedingly was she delighted with her cruelty, and she invented a story to tell the king at his return how ravenous wolves had eaten up the queen, his wife, and her 2 children. Clearly there was no crime scene investigation back then. This is too easy. It's too easy. One evening, as she was, according to her custom, rambling round about the courts and yards of the palace to see if she could smell any fresh meat, she heard, in a ground room, little Day crying, for his mamma was going to whip him because he had been naughty, and she heard at the same time little Aurora begging pardon for her brother. This fairy tale is straight y'all. She married the prince at the beginning of the story, so that couldn't have been the climax. The climax is gonna be eating kids, I guess, or something. I don't know. I'm a little disturbed. Okay. The ogress presently knew the voice of the queen and her children, and being quite mad that she had been thus deceived, she commanded next morning, by break of day, with a most horrible voice, which made everybody tremble, that they should bring into the middle of the great court a large tub, which she caused to be filled with toads, vipers, snakes, and all sorts of serpents, in order to have thrown into it the queen and her children, the clerk of the kitchen, his wife, and maid, all whom she had given orders should be brought there with their hands tied behind their back. They were brought out accordingly, and the executioners were just going to throw them into the tub, when the king, who was not so soon expected, entered the court on horseback, for he came post, and asked, with the utmost astonishment, what was the meaning of that horrible spectacle. No one dared to tell him, when the ogress, all enraged to see what had happened, threw herself head foremost into the tub, and was instantly devoured by the ugly creatures she had ordered to be thrown into it for others. The king could not help but be very sorry, for she was his mother. But he soon comforted himself with his beautiful wife and his pretty children. The end. Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Okay, so that was an extremely interesting. I threw that, yeah. Right? Not romantic. Not a romantic ending. Wow, that was. I don't even know what to say. Like his mom just like ended everything in front of him. His mom is like obsessed with eating his kids. This is so twisted. I see why they changed them too. We're gonna do Thumbelina next, which I think is a happy ending. 1 second. Good evening and welcome to tonight's sleep story. This evening I'm going to be reading to you the tale of Thumbelina. Have you heard of it? There once was a woman who wished very much to have a little child. She went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barley corn. It is not exactly the same sort as those which grow in the farmer's fields and which the chickens eat. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barley corn. Then she went home and planted it, and there grew up a large, handsome flower, somewhat like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed, as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden-colored petals. And as she did so, the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. But within the flower, upon the green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Thumbelina because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served for her cradle. Her bed was formed of blue violet leaves with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the peasant wife had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf which served the little one for a boat. Here she sat and rowed herself from side to side with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It was a very pretty sight. Thumbelina could also sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever been heard. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where she lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad. And she took up the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother. When he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't so loud, or she will wake," said the toad, "and then she might run away, for she is as light as a swan's down. We will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small that she cannot escape, and while she is there, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves which seemed to float on the top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared farther off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell in which Thumbelina still lay asleep. The tiny creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and yellow wildflowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor Thumbelina. She wanted to bring the pretty bed that she might put it in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily together with him in this marsh by the stream." Croak, croak, croak was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and wept. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said, so now they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. Okay guys, I just wanted to point out that they mean his personality was ugly and the mother's personality was ugly. As you can see, they steal, they kidnap people. So that's ugly behavior. I'm sure they looked just fine and everybody's beautiful in their own way. Like we have to, either you're filling up someone's bucket or you're taking it out. And these guys were taking it out because they're ugly personalities. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw she was very pretty, and it vexed them to think that she must go live with ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they gathered together in the water round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Thumbelina far away, out of reach of land. Thumbelina sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature." So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther, till it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered round her, and at last alighted on the leaf. The little maiden pleased him, and and she was glad of it. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered around her, and at last alighted on the leaf. The little maiden pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her. And the country through which she sailed was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it round the butterfly, fastening the other end of the ribbon to the leaf, which now glided much faster than before, taking Thumbelina with it as she stood. Presently, a large cockroach flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened Thumbelina felt when the cockroach flew with her to the tree. But especially she was sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf, for if he could not free himself, he would die of hunger. But the cockroach did not trouble himself at all about the matter. He seated himself by her side on the large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, though not in the least like a cockroach. This guy's a player. We haven't even found the prince yet. After a time, all the cockroaches who lived in the tree came to pay Thumbelina a visit. They stared at her, and then the young lady cockroaches turned up their feelers and said, "She has only 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim. Phoo, she looks like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady cockroaches. The cockroach who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly. He would have nothing more to say to her, and told her she might go where she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockroaches would have nothing to say to her. And all the while, she was still really the loveliest creature that one could imagine, and as tender and delicate as the beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer, poor little Thumbelina lived quite alone in the wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from their leaves every morning. So passed away the summer and the autumn, and then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly had flown away, and the trees and the flowers had withered. The large shamrock under the shelter of which she had lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, weathered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was herself so frail and delicate that she was near frozen to death. It began to snow, too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful falling upon one of us, for we are tall. But she was only an inch high. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not Near the wood in which she had been living was a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time. Nothing remained but bare, dry stubble, standing up out of the frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood. Oh, how she shivered with the cold. She came at last to the door of a field mouse, who had a little den under the corn stubble. There dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor Thumbelina stood before the door, just like a beggar girl, and asked for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, for she was really a good old mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was pleased with Thumbelina, so she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all the winter, if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I shall like to hear them very much." And Thumbelina did all that the field mouse asked her, and found herself very, very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet cloak. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be very well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." Thumbelina did not feel at all interested about this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit, dressed in his black velvet coat. He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine, said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of the sun and the pretty flowers because he had never seen them. Thumbelina was obliged to sing to him, "Lady bird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her because she had so sweet a voice. But he said nothing yet, for he was very prudent and cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own. And here she had permission to walk with Thumbelina whenever she liked, but he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of the dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead long. It was just lying there where the mole made his passage. The mole took in his mouth a piece of phosphorescent wood, which glittered like fire in the dark. That's the moral of the story. It's the same in any language. I think this is a French story. You're sure to fly on magical wings. The mole took in his mouth a piece of phosphorescent wood, which glittered like fire in the dark. Then he went before them to the light through the long, dark passage. When they came to the spot where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling so that the earth gave way and the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Thumbelina very sad to see it. She did so love the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully, but the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and must always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may very well say that, as a clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of this twittering if, when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death? Still, birds are very high bred." Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs upon the bird, she stooped down and stroked aside the soft feathers which covered his head and kissed the closed eyelids. "Perhaps this was the one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said, "and how much pleasure it gave me. You dear, pretty bird." The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the ladies home. But during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove, like to include them in. But during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. She carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and as she spread some of it on each side of the bird so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth, he looked peaceful. "Farewell, pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell. Thank you for your delightful singing during the summer when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast, but she was alarmed, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away into warm countries, but if one happens to linger, cold seizes it, and it becomes chilled and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and the cold snow covers it. Thumbelina trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high, but she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it over his head. The next night she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only but open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood by, holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little maiden," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall soon regain my strength and be able to fly about again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "it is cold out of doors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed. I will take care of you." She brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drunk, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to warm countries. At last he had fallen to the earth and could remember nothing more how he came to be where she had found him. All winter the swallow remained underground, and Thumbelina nursed him with care and love. She did not tell either the mole or the field mouse anything about it, for they did not like swallows. Very soon the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow bade farewell to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But she knew it would grieve the field mouse if she left her in that manner, so she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell, then, farewell, you good, pretty little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird as he flew out into the green woods, and Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go into the warm sunshine. Hey, sorry about that. I was so busy. I'm so surprised that my viewing count increased while I was gone. Hey, what's up? So I broke my necklace, so we're gonna put on this same one. There's no diamonds, but if we get the prince, there will be plenty of diamonds. Let's get the prince. I'm extremely wild. Tweet, tweet, sang the bird as he flew out into the green woods, and Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn, which had been sowed in the field over the house of the field mouse, had grown up high into the air and formed a thick wood to Thumbelina, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to to be married, little one," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now we will prepare your wedding clothes. They must be woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you are the wife of the mole." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when summer would be over. Then he would keep his wedding day with Thumbelina. But now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it hard like stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Thumbelina was not pleased at all, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear friend, the swallow, again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Thumbelina had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then she wept and said she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my white teeth." Did she really? Okay. "He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchens and his cellars are quite full. You ought to be very thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to take her away to live with him deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun. So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to take her away to live with him deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun. Because he did not like it, the poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun, and as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arm toward it. And then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm around a little red flower that grew just by her side. Greet the little swallow from me if you should see him again. Tweet, tweet, sounded over her head suddenly. She looked up, and there was a swallow himself flying close by. As soon as he spied Thumbelina, he was delighted. She told him how unwillingly she was to marry the ugly mole and to live always beneath the earth, nevermore to see the bright sun. And as she told him, she wept. Cold winter is coming, said the swallow, and I am going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains into warmer countries where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms and fly far away over the mountains into warmer countries where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer and the flowers bloom in greater beauty. Fly now with me, dear little one. You saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark, dreary passage. Yes, I will go with you, said Thumbelina, and she seated herself on the bird's back with her feet on his outstretched wings and tied her girdle to one of the strongest feathers. The swallow rose in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains covered with eternal snow. Thumbelina would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length they reached the warm countries where the sun shines brightly and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here, on the hedges and by the wayside, at length they reached the warm countries where the sun shines brightly and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here, on the hedges and by the wayside, grew purple, green, and white grapes, lemons, and oranges hung from the trees in the fields, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in the olden times. Vines clustered round its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow who carried Thumbelina. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers. I will put you down upon it, and then shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," she said, and clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had been broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the broad leaves. Sorry, sometimes my internet sucks. It just gets better. Like fairy tale powers. It gets better. Hang in there. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how surprised she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than she was herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwell in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted and thought her the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers and asked her her name and if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband from the son of the toad or the mole with his black velvet and fur. So she said yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty it was quite a pleasure to look at. Each of them brought Thumbelina a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings which had belonged to a large white fly, and they fastened them to Thumbelina's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Thumbelina and would have liked never to part from her again. "You must not be called Thumbelina anymore," said the spirit of the flowers to her. "It's an ugly name, and you are so very lovely. We will call you Maya. Farewell, farewell," said the swallow with a heavy heart. And as he left the warm countries, he flew back to Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house which dwelt the writer of fairy tales. The swallow sang tweet, tweet, and from his song came the whole story. The end. I do apologize about the lagging internet, I understand, and can't tell you how much I love you. Thank you, Whiska Off. Thank you so much for following. I love you. I hope that you guys really enjoyed tonight's reading of the fairy stories. Please give my channel on Twitch a follow. That would mean a lot to me. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I'll see you again in the next video. I love you so much.